Hi guys, guess what day it is? It is Chocolate Chip Day. For real, that's a national holiday and it really is today. It's Chocolate Chip Day, Chocolate Chip Day. Woo, 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 woo. You know what the best thing about chocolate chips is? Chocolate chip cookies. That actually does have a holiday and it's not until August, so we're gonna celebrate Chocolate Chip Day with real chocolate chips. I know, all my dogs just heard me say chocolate chips and now they're coming because they think they're gonna get some chocolate chips, but they're not, because chocolate chip cookies are not good for doggos. So what we're going to do is make some chocolate chip cookies. I have tried quite a few chocolate chip cookie recipes over the year, and I can tell you my actual favorite one is the one that's printed on the back of the chocolate chips. I don't know why that is my favorite, but something about that recipe is yummy, yum, yum. So we're going to be doing that recipe today. I just picked up Toll House because that's what was available at the grocery store. This is usually what I use. I went with the semi-sweet because it has pictures of chocolate chip cookies. These are going to be the ones that are made with the most sugar that you can get. Bittersweet's going to be a little bit less sweet, still yummy in a cookie, but just different options. And if you go to the grocery store, there are like a zillion trillion chip options to put in yummy cookies. Like I saw white chocolate, I saw butterscotch, I saw dark chocolate, I saw rainbow looking chocolate. It was crazy. I stuck with the original. So first things first, I need to preheat my oven to 375. It's super important to preheat your oven because it allows the oven to heat up and be at the right temperature while you are doing all the mixing. So then by the time you're ready to put it in the oven, it will be ready to go. All right. Sorry, I decided to also wash dishes, so my dishwasher is running. Poor timing. Alright, so I preheated my oven. That's ready to go. In a small bowl, is what the directions say, combine flour, baking soda, and salt. So I'm going to get a bowl out and my measuring cups, and we're going to start measuring out some ingredients. Alright, so first thing I'm going to measure out is my flour, and according to my recipe, I need 2 1/4 cup of flour. Now, this recipe does call for you to use a mixer, and I am not putting my flour mixture into, oops, I didn't level it off like I was supposed to. My bad. Anyway, this calls for a mixer, so I have my mixer and my mixing bowl out to the side. But I'm not putting my dry ingredients, my flour, my baking powder, my salt, those kinds of things, in it first, because I'm actually going to have to add that slowly as my mixer is going with all my wet ingredients. Now, you just saw me do not a very good thing and level off my flour. Very lazy, but I fixed it. I made the other one better. So there was my 2 whole cups, and now I need a 1/4 cup. Back to good baking habits. I saw this one trick online the other day that said you should read the entire recipe backwards. That way you make sure you have all the necessary things. And I thought that was pretty smart. I usually do read mostly the entire recipe. Sometimes I cheat and shortcut and don't always do that, but for the most part I do. But I thought reading it backwards was kind of interesting. Alright, next I need a TSP. TSP is teaspoon. That is going to be the smaller of your spoons. You have a TBSP, that is tablespoon. We want a teaspoon, that is smaller. It takes about 3 of these to get one of these. So I'm going to use the little lip, can't really see, the lip on my baking powder container, and I'll use that to level it off so it's nice and flat and smooth. Alright, and then I also need a TSP, aka teaspoon of salt. I'm not measuring this one over the bowl. If you've watched some of my other cooking videos, the reason for that is if all of a sudden I dump a bunch of salt, I don't want that in my mix. A little extra flour, baking soda isn't really, or baking powder isn't really going to hurt that much. It's not going to really mess up anything, but too much salt is really going to impact the flavor. All right, so I've got my dry ingredients mix, which is my flour, my baking soda, and my salt. So now I'm going to switch over to my large mixing bowl, which is my mixing bowl that is going to go, that actually attaches to my mixer. And in this, I am going to beat the butter, sugar, brown sugar, and vanilla. So I'm going to go ahead and get out my brown sugar. It has been softening on the counter over here, just because if I leave anything out on the counter, my dogs will think that that's fair game and they don't need to eat butter. It's not a part of their diet. All right, according to my recipe, I need a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. So I'm gonna grab that real quick. All right, so I grabbed my 2 sticks of butter. They're just a little bit softer than they would if they came straight out of the fridge. Not mushy by any stretch of the imagination. They're more like room temperature butter. All right, what was the other thing I need to add? Oh, I'm adding sugar. This recipe calls for 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. What that is talking about is regular white sugar. And most measuring cups don't have a 3/4 scoop, so you're gonna have to use the 1/4 scoop 3 times. And we'll go ahead and rinse mine out because mine's all covered in flour, and then I'll get ready to do that. Alright, so I've cleaned up my 1/4 scoop, and I'm going to scoop out 3 1/4, aka 3/4 with my granulated white sugar. And I'm just shaking it to kind of level it off. If you want to use the knife trick like we did for flour, you are more than welcome to do that. Alright, there's my granulated sugar. And next I need brown sugar. My oven just told me it's ready. That's good, because by the time I'm ready, it'll still be ready to go. All right, next up is 3/4 cup of packed brown sugar. So normally, if it's still in the package, you can kind of use that plastic piece to pack it in there, but this is going to be a little different in terms of measuring out the different ingredients. So normally we just kind of level it off, but for brown sugar, you actually are going to smush it into the measuring cup. So I've got my scoop, and now I'm just going to take a paper towel. You can use your fingers, you can use whatever you want, and I'm just going to push it down in there. So now I have a nice level 1/4 scoop of brown sugar. This recipe also calls for 3/4 cup of packed brown sugar. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm using my 1/4 scoop 3 times to get me that 3/4 that I need. I'm not really sure why we pack brown sugar when we're doing it in recipes. I think because brown sugar tends to be a little loose, maybe, a little fluffy. So to make sure you get enough, you can pack it. I'm not really sure. All right, and then I need vanilla. Now, if you have watched any of my recipes before, you know that I do not measure vanilla. For recipe's sake, it says 1 teaspoon. I just add what feels right, which is usually probably double what the recipe calls. If you like to measure things and you want to measure out your vanilla, you are more than welcome to. That's probably better per the recipe. I am just not ever going to measure my vanilla because I'm a rebel like that, I suppose. Alright, I'm going to put this on my mixer, so I'm cleaning up my brown sugar. And I'm going to go ahead, it says to beat until creamy. And so I am using my stand mixer. And I'm just using my paddle attachment. You don't need to use your whisk or your whatever other attachment you have. And I'm just going to let it go until it's nice and smooth. I'm not going to let the video record though because it's really loud. Alright, so I am just going to scoop some of this out. My butter, one of my sticks was really nice and soft, the other one wasn't as soft, and so it just makes it a little harder to come together. You really want to make sure Oh, I have flour all over me. Oh well. You really want to make sure that your butter is softened because it's just going to make this part a lot easier when it creams together with the sugar. This is kind of what it should look like, which is pretty much looking very similar to cookie dough. You should still kind of be able to see the sugar crystals, however, because we haven't added really a whole lot to this. So my next step is to add the eggs, but we're not adding both eggs at the same time. We are adding 2 eggs total, but we're going to add them one at a time. So what that means is I'm going to put my egg in, let it mix, get all incorporated, and then I'm going to stop it and put in my other egg and then do the same thing. Again, I don't really know why we do this, but I do know that it's an important step. Otherwise, the egg doesn't get all the way mixed in like we want it to. And I definitely don't want any eggy cookies. I want chocolate chip cookies. So I'm going to follow the recipe. I'm what I consider an egg cracking professional. So I'm just going to crack it straight into this bowl. However, if you are not as confident in your egg cracking abilities, then I highly recommend you just get another bowl and crack it in that bowl just to make sure you don't get any eggshells, because eggshells are a lot easier to pick out if all you have in that bowl is egg. If you've got it all the way in that mixture, it's going to be really hard to pick out, and eggshells in my cookies is not what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this, and then I'll add the other egg. Still really looks like that cookie dough mixture. It's a little bit wetter than it was the first time. I'm just mixing this on a low to medium speed. I'm really not getting over. My machine goes stir 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Those are the speeds, and I'm really not getting over the 4. So pretty slow, letting the machine kind of do its thing. All right, I've added my second egg, and I'm gonna let that incorporate before I start my next step. One thing you might want to do, if you just have this plain paddle attachment, you might want to take your spatula, which is just this tool I've been using, just to scrape down the edges. I will say though, my mom has this super awesome paddle, and one side is a built-in spatula. So if you have one of those fancy things, then you don't even have to do this step. But I don't have one of those things, so I'm scraping the bowl to make sure it all gets mixed in. So I'm going to let that mix in just a little bit more, since it just scraped down the side. Alright, so I just beat in my eggs. It still looks like cookie dough, but you can tell it's definitely a lot wetter. And that's because obviously we just added the eggs, which are really wet. And so now my next direction says beat in flour mixture gradually. So I'm going to operate very similar to how I just did with the egg. Is I'm going to take my bowl. I'm just going to dump it in, but a good method is to take a scoop, doesn't really matter which scoop, and scoop it in. In between each section, you're going to want to make sure the mixer goes and it gets all incorporated. If you do too much flour, you're going to look like this. Flour is going to go everywhere. It's not going to be a good time. So make sure that you only do, I usually do about a third, so a third, and then I let it mix, and then the other third, and I let it mix, and then the last third, and I let it mix. And that usually doesn't get me covered in flour, and it gives the cookie dough enough time to really come together, because flour is really dry. If you remember the cinnamon challenge, and if you don't remember the cinnamon challenge, you should probably look that up. It's a good time. But it's where people stick spoonfuls of cinnamon in their mouth, and what happens is they end up coughing, and out puffs all these cinnamon clouds. But the reason for that is because cinnamon's really dry. And so even when you put it in something wet like your mouth, it's so dry that if you put too much in, which is what the whole cinnamon challenge is about, you can't get it wet and to mix. So the same thing happens with flour. If you stuck a whole spoonful of flour in your mouth, you'd probably cough out a big flour of cloud. So we want to make sure that our mixture has enough time to incorporate all the dry ingredients, so we don't want to put too much in at a time. So I'm just going to put in about a third of my flour, and I'm going to let that go. Alright, so I'm going to take my spatula, because I don't have a fancy little paddle. I'm just going to scrape down the sides because I want that flour to get all into my cookie dough mix. And then I'm going to add another third of my flour mixture. So I have just about a third ish left in my bowl, and I'm gonna let this mix. So I'm doing the same thing. If you can see my beater, you can see my cookie dough is getting a lot stickier, kind of like how a cookie dough should be. And that's because it was a very wet dough, and now we've added a bunch of dry ingredients to make it really sticky. So I'm gonna add in last of my flour. A good trick is if you are mixing something like flour or powdered sugar that just has a tendency to poof, start with it on a really, really low setting for about 20 seconds till it gets started to get mixed in, and then you can speed it up. But if I just put this mixer down and I go like straight to setting 4, I'm gonna have flour everywhere. So I'm gonna do my one last mix. All right, so I got all my flour incorporated. The last thing that I need to do is stir in the morsels and the nuts. I am not making any cookies with nuts because I feel like that ruins a perfectly good cookie, but I will add in all my chocolate chips, which is this entire bag. Now, my mixer has a stir feature, which just means that paddle is going to go really, really slow. If you wanted to take it off and use a spatula or wooden spoon to stir them in, that would work too. Basically, you just don't want to put these in on high or on a high speed because you don't want to crush your chocolate chips. That's the yummy part of the cookie. We just want to mix them in. So we're going to stir them in gently. Alright, I think that's all my chocolate chips, so I'm just going to put this on stir. This is super low setting, and I'm only going to keep it on here for like 30 seconds at most. Use my spatula, and it looks like I've got some really yummy cookie dough. Now, unfortunately, because we have added egg, there is a risk that there is going to be salmonella in our cookie dough, which is really sad. Salmonella, any risk of salmonella gets cooked out when you put it in the oven, so it's really just when you eat it raw that you have that risk. I personally have eaten a lot of raw cookie dough and I haven't gotten sick, so that's lucky for me. If your parents let you lick the beater, enjoy it and just hope you don't get sick. Alright, so next up, I am going to get out my cookie sheet, or my baking sheet, and according to this, it says drop onto an ungreased baking sheet. If I was using a greased baking sheet, I would either use parchment paper, which we've talked about, or I would use like some Pam spray, and the reason for that is you just don't want your cookies to stick. Apparently, this has enough fat in it because it's got 2 sticks of butter. It's not going to stick, so I don't need to grease the cookie sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and get those out and get a spoon, and I'm going to get ready to drop some cookies. Alright, again, I'm not sure if I said this before, but my mom is like a super avid baker. She makes a zillion trillion cookies, especially around the holidays. So she has this fancy like cookie scoop, and it looks almost like tongs. It's like a triangle base, and you just kind of go like this. And what happens is in the like scoop part, there's like a little windshield wiper, and it goes. And so you scoop it and you squeeze it, and it comes right out. Super fancy. Don't got one of those. Another good option though are ice cream scoops. I don't have one of those either, so I am using my very fancy coffee scoop, and it is 2 tablespoons. You can use a regular spoon if you want, doesn't really matter. So I'm going to get all the yummy cookie dough that I want to turn into cookies off my batter, maybe for eating later. I'm feeling brave. And I am going to use my scoop, scoop out some cookies, and put them on my cookie sheet. Now, cookies are going to spread when they bake. They won't be that perfect ball size. Come on. There it goes. So I'm leaving about 2 inches-ish of space. So I'll probably do 3 in this column. cookie in there. There you go. Alright, and then I'll probably try to fit 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably 4 across, so I'll have a 3 by 4 for a total of 12 cookies. Now, according to this recipe, it makes 5 dozen. There are 12 in a dozen, which means I'm going to have to do this 5 times. I will not make you sit here for all 5 times because that will take a really long time. But I am going to get these cookies on my cookie sheet so that we can get them baking in the oven. And now it doesn't want to come out of my scoop. Come on. I need that fancy windshield wiper scoop. But I'm going to go finish doing this, getting my tray filled up, and then I'll show you when I put them in the oven. So I have made my dozen cookies, and I've made them pretty big. So I'm hoping they don't spread too much. But yeah, I'm going to have some really big cookies. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in the oven. According to my package, they will cook in 9 to 11 minutes. So I always go with the shortest time. I am going to check on them in 9 minutes. I'm really lucky that I have multiple cookie sheets. So while that one's in the oven, I'm going to get another cookie sheet out. And I am going to start putting some more cookies on so I can just swap them out. Lots of cookies, right? So I just got done scooping my other tray. This baking sheet is a little bit smaller, so I was only able to do a 3 by 3, which will give me a total of 9 cookies. I'm not gonna make any more baking sheets because then it just gets too warm in here and they start to melt even before I put them in. So I'm just gonna wait. I got about 5-ish more minutes left on my other cookies, and then I get to swap them out. So I just checked on my cookies at the 9-minute mark, and they were not quite done. What I'm looking for is right on the edge at the bottom. I'm looking for that to turn like a brownish color. I don't want the whole cookie necessarily to be brown, but definitely that bottom rim, if you will. None of the cookie was brown, so I put it in there for 2 more minutes, and we'll see what it looks like after that. Alright, so my first batch of cookies came out. You can see that little bit of brown towards the bottom. And so even though they're a little lighter on top, probably because I scooped them way too big, oh well, that is going to be a really yummy cookie. So I'm going to let these cool in the oven for a few minutes just so I can touch them, and then I'm going to move them to some cooling racks. And what a cooling rack is it's just like this wire tray, and allows air to get underneath the cookies and cool them a lot faster. I'm going to let them sit there for just a few minutes just so they finish cooking basically, and that pan cools down enough for me to touch it. But then you want to move them to some kind of cooling rack where air can get underneath them just so that they cool down consistently. Alright, I'm going to make the rest of my cookies and then we'll be done. So I hope you do celebrate National Chocolate Chip Day, whether it's through chocolate chip cookies or maybe chocolate chip pancakes or chocolate chip muffins or, I don't know, whatever you create with chocolate chips. Bye guys!